believe it was Thich Nhat Hanh, a Zen master, that mentioned the opportunity to heal can begin with your next breath. That each moment in itself is fresh and new, just as if a river was flowing. It's always something new. And when we carry the past with us, it completely covers that up. There's a sense of everything seemingly being the same, people being the same, situations being the same. And there was something I'd read about everything in form is always under great change. Arrangements are being made, or just the simplicity of the vibration of everything. And the mind is such a narrow bandwidth to understand that it could, almost in one brushstroke, it could cover up the infinite now, the limitless now. And with, as he's known as he was always affectionately called Tai, spiritual, the Zen master, teacher. It was always encouraging to know that no matter how much has gone on in the past, or the attempts or the efforts that have been made, that still there is always a chance to heal, to begin that, or continue that in your next breath. And perhaps I haven't thought of those words in a while, but the action, the practice of returning to the now, especially after perhaps being aware of my own unconsciousness, being in the mind, and completely letting that go and stepping into this moment. Of course, there's only always this moment, but just another way of expressing it to perhaps create some space from so-called past. That there is always this fresh moment of now. That perhaps for maybe several years or decades that something has been happening and behaving in a certain way, but then there is now. No matter how much of the past, there is always the opportunity, the freshness of now. And when people often have some sort of awakening, and I say that in a very casual way. Awakening meaning, for me, the acknowledgement of the present moment. Of the deep I, not the form of the body, the forms of the mind. That happens in this moment, in one moment. In one breath, perhaps there's the sudden acknowledgement, perhaps going to a retreat or hearing a quote or watching a video, and suddenly something deep within recognizes what the words of the teacher is being pointed to, and there's a connection happening. And during my current process, my challenges, this is often a very useful pointer that no matter what has happened, focus on this moment. What are you doing on this moment? Am I engaging in thought? Am I causing more pain and difficulty? Am I complaining? And the moment, as many teachers have said, the moment you recognize you have been unconscious or you've been lost in thought forms, then you are no longer. You are now here and in the now. And perhaps you can subtly smile at, oh, I was lost, but now here I am. Without perhaps needing or perhaps letting go of a reaction, especially with intensity as well. I can imagine even spirituality in the present moment being a bit of a novelty when it is discovered. And perhaps one is to go to retreats or books and there's a huge momentum happening, and then perhaps there's a spiritual high coming back from a retreat or reading a book or listening, and then at some point the mind comes in again and you're doing the same thing. Perhaps the same patterns are occurring. And you think back to that moment of spiritual highness where you may have said to yourself that I'm never going back to mind. I'm going to stay here in the peace, the lightness, the simplicity. And you may have said to yourself, wow, it's so clear. Of course I'm not going to go back to my conditioning. I'm done with that. And then perhaps in the midst of an unconscious reaction or anger, you find yourself back there again. It's happened to me many times where perhaps maybe a deepening has happened or an intense experience to reconnect to presence. And quite often I say to, maybe the words come as a thought that I'm not going back. And it's not it's not done out of willpower or effort in that way of determination, but it's the obvious almost answer that why go back to almost the pain and suffering of living, being obscured by the mind constantly, versus the open, expansive, the vastness, the stillness of now. And so this pendulum may be swinging. Perhaps there's some deeper movements, then huge, perhaps unconscious reactions. Maybe there's no interest in being spiritual anymore, you're needing a break from that. Perhaps there's a time. That's come up for me where perhaps there's a recognition that I'm unconscious, so perhaps I'm not completely unconscious or completely gone, but I know I'm allowing or I'm participating in these, or maybe I'm inviting these conditioned patterns of behavior. And there is no interest in trying to be present in that moment. Perhaps it's, in one way it's said, maybe there's too much mind for presence, for more presence to come in. Maybe there's enough there to maybe recognize what I'm doing. And perhaps in these moments there is nothing to do but just allow that conditioning, the intensity of mind to pass. Maybe in the past I have maybe tried to fight against that, where there's no interest in being present or reading or getting a little pointer to just get myself out of it. But maybe I forced myself to watch a video, and perhaps after 20 seconds I stopped it. I thought, no, I can't be watching that. And maybe there's been moments when I've watched a video or put on maybe an Eckhart video or a Rupert Spira video, and at the start I'm like, no, I can't be watching this. This is either it's painful or there's no interest, or there's too much pain to watch that. And sometimes it maybe feels like it's being forced, and then maybe there's times when it's useful to turn it off, to not force yourself into. Maybe one needs to go through that suffering of mind. And maybe other times there's a soothing that happens in watching that. I perhaps began thinking this is not a good idea, or I'm not really interested in hearing any spiritual content, and then 2 minutes in, all of the intensity is dissipated, and now I'm back in the ease of this moment, back in my essential nature, wondering what had happened in the last 20 minutes or hour or days. And there may be a passing thought of, oh, why can't I just step into now? This is where I want to be. But so it's working with what is available, but also not working against something. Sometimes with this new sort of spiritual novelty of listening to spiritual content and delving into this, what can seem like a new world, that sometimes the idea of being spiritual, it can almost get in the way of this. I find when perhaps there's some vulnerability there when discovering or connecting to presence, perhaps for the first time in this form, or recognizing it, that maybe there's a clinging to I must stay in presence, or the idea of being spiritual and present can be enjoyed by the mind, or the mind may hijack that and think, okay, that's who I am now, I'm a spiritual person, I'm this, and this is my teacher, or this is my modality of it, and almost rigid thought forms, rigid frameworks happening again. And then sometimes that can get in the way of perhaps the need, the teacher of suffering. Perhaps, I need to quickly get out of this. I shouldn't be in mind again. I know better than that. But so even spirituality, if it's seen through a thought form or a mental framework that's stagnant, then that can also become an obstacle. And perhaps that's more an obstacle that happens at the early stages, perhaps, of recognizing this deep I, this and even in later stages, but it's also I've been through my own sort of journey through religion for most of my life, and then kind of had to let that go, and then teachings of Eckhart came, and the essential nature was recognized from the essential nature, the essence of practice of religion and that practice, and was able to continue on with those teachings and those pointers. But still sometimes that framework comes into my mind as well. I should be more present than I am, or I shouldn't be as unconscious as I am, or go through stages of unconsciousness. Instead of letting go and just again opening yourself up to this moment, not carrying that past, even the past, what could seem like useful thoughts sometimes, that useful spiritual frameworks from the past. But just recognizing the here and now. So I'd like to just read a little bit more of picking this back up, the book on titled Karma. And I've noticed as well with this particular book, it's a bit more difficult to sort of read extracts, because often the chapters are whole in themselves, and it can be quite a detailed explanation there. So I'm going to sort of try my best to sort of pick out some useful extracts that I can share here, and Of course, if the words in this book resonates, then its title of this book is called Karma by the author Sadhguru, who's also a teacher as well. So this passage that I'm going to read from or extract is called When the Dead Live Through You. Traditionally in India, the term samskara is used to describe the enduring impact of our genetic memory on our present. Your body actually carries 1 trillion times more memory than your mind. The word samskara denotes the maelstrom of hereditary memories and impressions that are bequeathed to us by our ancestors, our clan, or our tribe. And so, when a child sings exceptionally well, for instance, it is common for people to say, "Oh, that is their samskara." That means that this particular gift has come to the child from their gene pool, their ancestral learning. These genetic memories are not inherently positive or negative. It is how we deal with them that makes the difference. We carry the memories of our ancestors within us, but whether this memory has become a source of bondage or one of advantage depends on how much distance we have created from it. And again, mentioned many times about the distance, holding our karma at a distance. So when being present in the present moment, I mentioned the freshness of now. So that freshness is free of the conditioning. It's free of memory. Of course, you can bring in memory, you can play with, use it to your advantage, as it says here. You can tap into that, but it's no longer in that present space. It's not so close. There's a recognition of your essential nature, the unconditioned essence of who you are. So we've got the form, the body, which says it's going to trillions of more times memory than the mind. So you think about the ancestral path of the physical memory in the body. We owe a great deal to our ancestors, but if we are to live on this planet as independent, full-fledged lives, not as puppets of our forebears, we must first find ways of becoming individuals. Now, though the spiritual process is about dissolving the myth of separateness, an important first step on the path is to become an individual. This may seem to be a paradox, but it is not so. When you are the consequence of many influences, you are a crowd. When you are a crowd or clan of influences, transformation is impossible. Crowds can evolve over a period of time, but they cannot be transformed. Transformation, as the word suggests, necessitates a form. Only an individual can be transformed or transcend the narrow identification with separateness. It is impossible for a collective to ever be enlightened. Enlightenment can happen only to an individual. So what I understand from this, and what I can almost feel in myself, because for me there's a great deal of challenge with being influenced from people's views or the way my upbringing was. Well, I was very malleable to people's views, and I still am. Maybe vulnerable is a good word as well. If there's people, loved ones in my life who have strong energy, strong mind, perhaps I seek their approval or check to make sure, oh, is this behaviour okay? Should I decide to do this? There's often that checking beforehand, and perhaps maybe their views often take over mine. I think, okay, let's do what they say because they probably know better than I do, or they have this sense. So at the same time, there's a great respect for, okay, that what this form, the journey it's taken, the memory, the physical memory that your essential nature is occupying for this temporary period. But also there's the understanding to not, almost it's said here, to live like a puppet to that. You are stepping out into your own recognition, so that maybe that perhaps sense of separating from that to your own independence, your own separateness. Before, as it says, going through the spiritual process of dissolving that separateness. And you can almost, I can always feel it as well with those influences, it's almost pulling you in different directions, and you're almost always on the surface of life in some respects. You're never deeply feeling and understanding, having your own recognition of viewpoints. You're always sort of catering to various influences or people, and you can sense the sort of the tension there, the cloudiness of that. And so only an individual can be transformed. And the words coming to mind is groundedness as well. When you're anchored and grounded, that's a recognition of you in this moment. So samskara is important because it is a reminder that we are shaped by memory on many subtle levels that we are not even aware of. You may not be conscious of it, but something within a human being deeply resents the loss of freedom. Perhaps I'll read these last couple of paragraphs. The most searing reminder of this loss of freedom is in prison life. I've witnessed this firsthand when I was conducting programs in prisons. The interesting thing about prisons is that they can actually be pretty well organized. The food comes on time, you are given clothing and shelter, the lights are turned on and off for you, doors are opened for you and, of course, closed after you. For some people who live pretty poorly outside, prison life is a structured alternative. And yet, if you enter a prison, you feel the pain in the air. This is a deep, inexplicable pain because security has been given, but freedom has been taken away. The loss of freedom is the deepest suffering for a human being. Whether your freedom is taken away by a prison, by your own samskaras, or by genetic or evolutionary memory doesn't really matter. Either way, you will find after a while that your life will be permeated by unexplained suffering. You will not know why, but your entire existence will seem stifling, repetitive, constraining. So, in one sense, it's this talk about awakening or enlightenment. It's almost built in. You can imagine everyone's on that path of moving towards that, moving towards freedom, that sense of their true selves. And again, suffering is life's great teacher. Perhaps there may be signs of perhaps maybe that one should move in this direction, and if one doesn't choose to, perhaps the suffering will wake them up. So maybe these subtle hints of life giving you that, oh, maybe this is the right way to go, the right people to interact with, the right person to be with, and then perhaps an alarm clock is needed. So again, it's maybe I'm going to read this, but there's some mention of again responsibility there. It's our responsibility how we respond. We have obviously this physical memory, but how are we responding in this moment? And perhaps there isn't the need to sort of completely break down the sort of physical memory, try to understand it. Of course, if the curiosity or the desire is there, then one can do that. For instance, for me, maybe who knows how much mental health or my own other health symptoms are come from that. But for me, what's more important and desirable is to focus on this moment, being aware of the ingredients that is happening, the forms taking place, whether it's mental health, physical health, but just working with that. And again, sort of reading and sharing these things, and it's looking behind the scenes of the curtain that's perhaps been closed for many decades for many of us, and now it's showing more of how what we thought life was, this body and the identification with our thought forms as me, and then me living separately, individually through life, maybe the fearful life, the fearful world, that separateness, and then now looking behind a curtain of one's essential nature and that temporary sort of makeup of, physical form or conditioning or the memories we have, physical memory, the mental memory, the mind. And again, it's almost painting that landscape of reality, the reality that exists in this moment. So perhaps as the final couple of paragraphs, I'll end with this. When you live by the memory of a single book, you are religious. When you live by the memory of several books, you are intellectual. When you live by the memory of several generations of people, you become a truly compassionate human being. But when you live beyond the memory of generations of people, you become a mystic. Those who share our genes absorb our legacies so much more easily than others. However, the science of yoga is about raising yourself to a place where your genetic memory has no influence upon you whatsoever. Now you become what the world regards as a seer, someone who sees ahead with piercing clarity and insight. With deepening yogic practice, you find your samskaras are no longer limited but by categories of class, tribe, or community. You are now capable of influencing just about anybody. As a world citizen, your bequest becomes truly global. And so of course the yogic practices, in one sense it can be very specific practices. There's some mentioned in the book, but also the essence of yoga that was defined by the author as unity, a sense of unity. As we look at the mind as fragmentation, separateness, versus unity, the oneness, the one moment, the one essential nature. So when I refer to essential nature, this is the same essential nature in everything around us. The same vibration, the same things that's appearing in the space of now, that everything vibrates and appears in and dissolves. That unity. you are in that space of alignment, in union, then the space of, that is space between the karmic makeup. I can't remember the words that I just was reading a moment talking about that, but I guess the physical memory, those trillions of times more memory than mine that's in the body, there's now space from that. I was going to end this with just a bit of a meditation in space, but I can sense perhaps there's some tiredness or brain fog or unwellness I can feel in me, so it's probably good to end this here, but perhaps maybe an invitation as I end this to just maybe invite presence to that union, that place of alignment. And to sense that within yourself. Thank you for joining me, and as always, take care.